Hello. How lovely.
Hi.
Sorry, finish your sentence because I said hello to people.
That's okay. Everything with me is fine, but America, we've got wildfires and hurricanes and idiots and,
Oh, no, but the head person says it's going to get cooler, so you'll be fine.
He says a lot of things. Yeah.
I don't think we're in any position to judge.
Well, I was just about to say that.
We've got enough idiots of our own, thank you.
He also told them that they should rake the forests so they would stop. Yeah, that's was his answer. The forests need to be raked so there wouldn't be wildfires. Brilliant. Brilliant. Yay! There are 49 days until our election, I believe. So
yeah, so we've got about 5 years, I think. So
well,
anyway, hello Neil. Hello. And hello Laura, who I can't see, but hello. Marvellous. Oh, hello. Oh, in the car. Brilliant. Drive carefully.
That's fairly terrifying, Laura. Well, I can see Megan. I can't hear her. Oh, she is.
I was going to say, hopefully there'll be some more people along soon. This is quite, I know Roz and Ali can't come because they're working. Hooray!
Good. Maybe you all can just explain Brexit to me while we wait.
I'm sure you've a better handle on that than we have. What I don't quite understand, and I've never got my head around it, is how, I mean, I was taught very firmly that, always tell the truth. And I've been renowned for always telling the truth, not always in a good way. And it seems strange to me that people can lie and lie and lie and lie and lie.
And be world leaders.
And get where water wouldn't go. and nobody seems to realise, or at least not enough people seem to realise, they don't care. They don't need to care. They're billionaires. World burns down, they'll live somewhere else. It's just, yeah. I don't get it. I've never got it. But at the moment, I just think the idiots have taken over the planet. Everywhere.
Yeah, I'm glad it's not just us.
No, it's not.
Yes, we had about 3 months of going, oh, well, look at America. And then we went, oh now we've done it.
Before it all happened, before that dreadful year,
2016.
I remember saying to my husband, I said, you do realise that Trump will get elected and we will leave Europe? He said, don't be ridiculous. That will never happen.
It all started when David Bowie died. That's my theory.
Do you know, I've heard that theory too. I'm with you. I agree, Jenny. Definitely. Yeah.
When who died?
This apocalypse.
David Bowie. I agree. From February that year, off it went.
Downhill from there.
Yep.
He's out there taking his revenge on all the pettiness and things. I don't know. It's scary though. We laugh, but it is scary.
Hello, Alto Joe W.
Hello.
You must have done a choir thing.
I did.
Yay.
It was very disconcerting because it was obviously all online and we couldn't hear each other and the facilitator couldn't hear us, but it was what it was. It was a fundraiser, so that was a good thing too. Yeah.
Am I audible?
You are, Julia. Hello.
Brilliant, thank
Hello.
you. I'm not always. I keep switching mics on my computer, so sometimes I am and sometimes I'm not.
Sorry, let's have you.
Oh, lovely.
How are you, Nadine?
I am. Hi, Nadine.
Who've we got? Oh, lots of lovely people.
I know.
Gosh, I'm the only one in a fleece, and I don't know why I'm in a fleece today. It's boring
Is
outside.
it cold where you live, Julia?
Inside my house, it's cold. Everywhere outside, it's warm.
Oh, hello, Nadine.
Hello, sweetheart. How's Bolton?
Well, you know, boring.
I do.
Yes, she does.
Yeah. I'm going to get out of lockdown for about 24 hours, I think, and then we'll all be locked down again.
Well, get out. Make the most of it while you can.
I'm going to see a friend for the first time in 6 months, and then I think after that we'll be shielded again. Never mind.
Well, make the most of it.
I'm quite resigned now. I'm quite finding other things to do.
I like your top. It's a lovely bright colour.
It's actually a dress. I've got really hot because we're in the process in the middle of all this of trying to sell the flat. And so we've got some people, estate agents coming around. So of course, been cramming things into cupboards.
Yeah, hide everything. Yeah.
I got really hot, and it's really, really hot outside here in Leicester. Really hot. It's about 27 degrees.
Oh,
So
wow.
I've put a
It's
summer
around
dress
us
on
too.
for the last
Where are
time.
you, Nadine?
Sorry,
Sorry, Fruit Challenge. Where are you?
I'm in Leicester.
Oh,
In the city of Leicester, right in the middle of it all. It's fine. I only live with Paul, and the problems are where there's lots of people. There's actually very few. You know, I don't live in a crowded area, so. But we do live in the circle of the city, so.
Yeah.
I suppose you're in much the same situation, aren't you, Anne? It's sort of,
Yeah.
Ja, det kan du. Jeg vil gerne høre, er det muligt at få en kop kaffe i et højt glas, bare med nogle isterninger i? Undskyld, den skal jeg lige have igen. Kunne det lade sig gøre at få en...
Nice to hear some
I
Danish.
hope she wasn't wanting help.
It's because I hear my daughter-in-law speak to my grandchildren in it all the time. So.
Have you picked any of it up, Julia?
Nay, it's what I picked up. No, don't do that.
Well, who wants some good news?
Oh, yes.
I have just been booked tentatively for all the season of shows at Bradford Alhambra next year.
Brilliant.
About
Excellent.
6-7 shows, something like that.
Excellent.
So if they happen, that will be lots of work.
Yeah, great. I've bought a microphone.
Oh, well.
I have, because Kate does all our recording, if we need to, or other theatres do. So I've never actually had to do a great deal of it. But after talking to the lovely Gary, I have got a microphone. It's been sitting on the shelf for nearly a week because it's a bit. I still have. I got a slow cooker. I was given one about 5 years ago, and for 4 years.
You can't speak into a slow cooker. Doesn't do it.
I was too scared to use it. Anyway, I eventually used it. Now the microphone's sitting on the shelf looking at me. And I don't know what it is about things like that. Just one or two things in life that put me off. but I won't. That's my next task.
We've just finished recording. It's just about to go. Amelia's about to go live, streamed on, which is great because I really loathed it when I described it the first time. But they've reduced it by an hour, and it's a very good show now.
Brilliant. Hooray!
Well, I've just actually managed to put a play. We did extended notes for something that the Curve was streaming, and I suddenly decided I bet we could put the actual AD onto that video. So we haven't told.
I bet you could with Gary.
We're in the process. Kate's recording it today, and then we'll send it to them. So I've had actually practiced in putting a play onto a video, and it was great fun and really quite easy. I don't know why I was so, great fun.
Well, Birmingham Royal Ballet is starting to show signs of getting going, which is great. They're just doing a little. They're opening up. They're having an open house on Sunday, and we're doing a tiny little snatch of audio description in a room that people can go and listen to.
Oh, lovely!
So lovely. For Nutcracker. So, because I think they might try and put it on this Christmas somewhere. I'm not sure where.
I think they are beginning to look forward a little bit.
It's looking a little more hopeful.
Yes, Julie and I have got Prince of Egypt next year in August.
We have, haven't we? Yes. Again, we missed it last year. Yes. And the RSC have booked me for November next year.
Brilliant.
Oh.
So if I can survive that long.
It's like getting a consultant appointment, isn't it? If you haven't died of what's wrong, you can go and see them.
Well, the Lowry have booked me for the Gruffalo in December.
Oh, that was in the newspaper.
This December or next December? This December.
This coming one. So excited because I didn't think I'd do anything this year again.
No, that's amazing.
Well, the RSC haven't cancelled the audio descriptions of Matilda this November, though I'm not exactly holding my breath.
Oh, geez, straight.
Well, that's the West End version.
The West End version, yeah.
Ooh.
They're still selling tickets for it, though not through the RSC website, but I presume the Cambridge is selling the tickets, so we'll see.
Just depends what happens in the next 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Who owns the Cambridge?
Not
an IMAX.
Yes, because NIMAX are doing things, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're opening 6, the Lyric. And everybody's talking about Jamie is going to start again, isn't it?
Oh, yes, I saw that, yes.
In the West End.
Else.
In the West End.
Yeah. The NIMAX have said they're going to try and open 6 theatres as well as 6, just to make things confusing. They're going to try and open 6 theatres. They've got a programme, I think, from mid-October, which is more sort of concerts and kind of warm-up events, I suppose, to then lead on to bringing some shows back. And they've moved 6. I think 6 was in the arts, wasn't it?
Yes.
So they're moving that into the Lyric, I suppose, to give them more capacity. It's a conversation we've been having this morning. The smaller, in some ways, the smaller capacity venues are easier to open because I need many fewer people to open this space behind me, but my capacity is 16, so that doesn't make it viable. So then you've got a bigger route. So my team was saying to me, well, why can't we open? Why can't we do some things? I said, because Derby Theatre are opening. Well, Derby have got 550 seats. So if they operate at a third, that's 150, and you can make something economically viable at 150. Might not be what you would normally put on the stage, but you can make it work. 16, I can't make a raffle financially viable with 16 people. Although I'm fairly certain the people of Wolverhampton would turn up to a raffle if we put one on at the moment. So yeah, it's interesting to see what's going to happen with the West End and where shows are at, because I don't know if you saw the video that the Lord put out the other day at the at Her Majesty's, where literally everything has been stripped out, and it's a bare stage. So even if Mr. Dowden was to come in tomorrow and say you can open next week, it's going to be months before Phantom's reopened, because they've got to rebuild the thing. But similarly, if you've got a show like Jamie, which sits in a box and is still on the stage, as far as I'm aware, you know, you can probably open that in a fortnight with a you know, well-drilled cast. So it's an interesting time, and I think I still don't think they understand. I still don't think that the government understand that it's not just a tap that you can switch on. But it's been cheering, I suppose. Well, just listening to you chatting for the last 10 minutes about, you know, this work's coming back in, or this has come in, or I've been booked for this and that. That's great to hear. But it's also good to hear that plans for some venues. I've had an email from the Hope Mill this morning in Manchester, because I've got tickets booked for Rent. I should say this quietly, actually, because Sue doesn't know yet. But I've got tickets booked for Rent just for Christmas, and they've emailed today to say they're going ahead with that, which is really good, because actually I think they announced that about 2 weeks before lockdown. I certainly booked my tickets as a sort of, here, have some money in the pot to keep you ticking over, and if we don't make it to the show, then that's fine, but let's just see where we're at. And certainly, yeah, with a lots of theatres obviously doing different things, but doing something. I know certainly this week I've seen Derby, as I've mentioned, Lichfield, Garrick are doing a pop-up panto, I think with a cast of 3. You know, there were theatres who were starting to look at the viability. And I suppose, just as you were alluding to at the top, we sort of wait and hope that we don't get into too many of these lockdowns and how they might impact viability. It certainly seems that it isn't having any knock-on in Birmingham in terms of business operation. This ongoing problem does very much seem to be about people meeting at home. And as somebody who's been working in a venue for the last few months, you know, planning for the return, I do understand the logic behind that. You know, we have spent hundreds of hours working out every little bit of, you know, detail of how we can keep people safe and secure. But if my niece comes round to the house on a Sunday, the first thing she does is, you know, jump up on me and, you know, goes off and plays with all the toys and licks the windows and does whatever else that, you know, 3-year-old does when they're excited. I can understand how that is, you know, it's that bit, I think, that's complicating things at the moment. And the say venues have certainly, well, if it's anything like what I've done in the last few months, it's been a
Still, apparently we're allowed to go grouse shooting. Apparently.
We are.
So there we go.
So, yeah, the first hunt starts at the Arena Theatre on Saturday afternoon about 2 o'clock. Bring your guns, leave them at the door, and I've got 12 very highly trained grouse who are going to have a crack at Phantom of the Opera.
I mean, apart from the grouse, which I don't understand, well, I do, because I know who's, you know, there's a lot of that about. But I do get it, and I find it interesting that people don't get it. When I talk to my clinical colleagues and the medics at the university, when you go, all we see is the pictures of people who aren't complying, but the vast majority of people do. They do comply, and they wear their masks in shops, and they socially distance, and they queue appropriate, and so on. The vast majority do. What you can't do is control what people do in their own homes. You can't police that. You can't do anything about that. And when people live in multi-generational homes or homes of multi-occupancy, it's quite common to have 30 people around at the same time. You know, and they can't police that, and that's why it is, because that's where it spreads.
Yeah.
But trying to get that message across, they seem to have failed again.
So I have to say, I get quite fed up with all this blaming young people. When I went to London the other day, there were lots of people not wearing their masks properly, and none of them were young. They were all the same age as me. The young people were all wearing their masks beautifully.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's a lot of sort of all ages. I've seen a lot of sort of middle-aged people who just you know, it's against my human rights and all this malarkey. And I feel sorry for young people, because when you think about it, they're, you know, university age or whatever, they can't date. How are they going to meet people? How are they going to socialise? It's, you know, it's all right for mouldy oldie like me, up at home with hubby, you know.
I've spent the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks working on the clearing hotlines for the university, because obviously, you know, we weren't doing a lot, so they said, you know, can you come and give us a hand over here? And, you know, if it's really moving conversations actually with students who are really struggling with how's it going to work, what's it going to look like, what's my experience going to be like, should I wait a year? You know, but being aware that there's another tranche of 18-year-olds coming along next year, so those decisions are really difficult for them to make. And you know, the university is doing what it can in terms of offering face-to-face learning alongside online. We've got students back in, because they teach film studies out of the arena, so we've got students back in on the 28th, but how long they will last on campus for, we don't know. And it's really, really difficult. I agree. I really feel for them.
Yeah, I do.
And they are being, you know, disproportionately impacted by the job losses, and you know, it's yeah, a lot of them living on their own as well.
Yeah, I mean, even if they take a year out, what can they do?
Yeah.
Because all the overseas work and voluntary work and so on, that's all dried up. You can't go. You can't get jobs. You can't get work experience, because you just can't. There aren't places available. Not as if you can go backpacking for a year.
No.
That wouldn't quite be the safest thing to do at the moment.
No. Maybe to the bottom of the garden and back, but it doesn't feel like a year, does it?
But I wouldn't quite, you know, like a lot of my kids' friends, they went backpack around India and all that sort of area, and Australia and so on. Yeah, you wouldn't do that at the moment.
No, absolutely not. So to move this into some kind of structure, I suppose. It's good to see you all, by the way. I don't think I did a formal welcome, so nice to have you all here. And we've had a few, I think somebody mentioned at the beginning, actually, we've had a few really nice apologies from people who are working, which is a lovely situation to be in. Working on the next Old Vic in camera show, which is really exciting. I don't know whether any of you, I thought Three Kings was fantastic. They were sort of refining things out of the back of Lungs, which I wasn't quite on board with Lungs, but I thought Three Kings was really good. So it's nice to see those things creeping back in. And I suppose that's sort of the conversation to start with, really, is how we approach immediately the next, what is it now? I hate to say these things, but I think somebody told me yesterday it's 100 days to Christmas. So sort of what do we do for the next 100 days? And I think, as we've already mentioned, there's a few theatres that are starting to do things. I think we're pretty certain now that anybody that hasn't announced a big Christmas show, or certainly doesn't announce in the next week, won't be doing one. I think pantos are pretty much gone, apart from those that are doing sort of like Lichfield are doing this. I said a minute ago, doing this radical rebuild of a panto, but they have that. They've got a guy called Sam Raybone. I don't know whether any of you know Sam. He's been there. He's the equivalent of Matt Slack at the Hippodrome. He's been in their panto every year for the last 20 years. And so Sam is very much part of the furniture at the Garrick, and he's come up with this much smaller, and they're calling it a pop-up panto, that they're able to offer with massively reduced production costs, which is all part of the debate, isn't it? So how we can sort of assist, how we can help, how we can make sure that we're not missing out on things over the next few months is worth having a consideration about as well. Some other things that came in from Ros in her absence that she thought we might like to have a think about. One questioning about people taking their own equipment into venues, you know, whether that be headsets, microphones, you know, to speed things up, to assist things along, whether that helps. And whether anybody knew, whether she sort of talked about a venue audit, really, of which venues that would assist, which venues that would help. So maybe we can spend some time talking about that. Also, obviously, we're trying to push on with this idea of supporting venues and you know, doing everything we can on our side to make it easy for the venues to get people back in. And we had conversations at the last executive meeting about producing a risk assessment, sort of very generic, could fit into any space risk assessment, where that we could make available to all audio describers to then provide to their venues. As I say, from a venue point of view, my current activity risk assessment is about 28 pages long. I'm having to do one of those for every facet of everything. So if somebody comes to me and says, I want to do this, and here's the risk assessment for it, yes, please. That's making life much easier and would, you know, make those conversations simpler. So whether we want to talk about that, and then just some thinking around touch tours as well, and whether we can maybe sort of have a chat around those. So I think that gives us an agenda for the next hour or so, and see where we get to. And also, is Tony back on the call? I saw Tony pop in and pop out. It looks like he's popped out again. Tony, Tim's invited Tony McBride in, as he was doing the audio description on that. Was it the Greenwich Festival? Something like that, Tim?
Greenwich, Docklands.
Okay.
It's about 15 productions, because he asked me to edit the intros.
Yeah.
Right. And just to hear his feedback and his experience on that as well. I thought that'd be useful. So how are people feeling, sort of looking at the run between now and Christmas, apart from picking up work here, there, and everywhere, or not?
I think it's going to be very quiet between now and Christmas.
I think the rep in Birmingham might be doing something, but they're not. Nigel didn't think there'd be any work for us until next year. So I don't know what they're planning before Christmas.
I'm feeling particularly disconnected from everything, because a couple of I've had sort of about 2 inquiries this year, and I've had to turn them down because because I'm vulnerable to COVID and can't force myself to go out of the house at the moment. So yeah, I'm trying to think about ways to maybe use this time, maybe try and get hold of some better recording equipment, and just use this time to invest in some skills that, you know, revolve around work that I can do remotely. I was saying to Neil recently that I hadn't realised until just Googling it that the AdLab Pro training materials had actually all been published and are all out there now, and there's a screen module in that I thought I might have a little look at, having not done screen AD training before. So I'm just trying to use it as personal investment time, but yeah, feeling very uncertain and disconnected, really.
Yeah, all the work that I've had, Jenny, since lockdown has been recording things, a gallery exhibition, and then just tiny little films and online projects that theatres have done. So I've invested in, as a few of us have, in equipment, and just getting up to speed with different software packages like Reaper, so that if something comes along, you're able to say yes, whereas before I always used to go into a studio to do it. So it just means that if something does come along that you can do from the safety of your own home, you feel a bit more able to say yes, you can take it on. Yeah.
Neil, can I ask you about hi? Can I ask you about Derby? You were saying something about Derby putting a show on.
Yes.
I'm the only active available audio describer from Derby Audio Describers, and I haven't heard a squeak from the theatre.
I think they may only have announced it yesterday. I'm just throwing up their website. My team were only talking to me about it yesterday. Let me have a look. They're doing The Little Mermaid, which as I understand it, was their Christmas studio production. So it's for it's their under 5 show, and I think they've moved it from the studio into the house, so that they can do the same numbers essentially. But
right,
so they can do studio audiences in their house. So they've got, but I'm fairly set up. Just
it's been on Twitter and Facebook and things, I think.
I think they only announced it certainly this week. I'm sure they had a conversation. I was in a group with them, but it's Sarah's production, and I would suggest harassing whoever you normally harass over there. I think they're drifting back in as well as a team. I think that's the sort of, I suppose, the positive side of the negative side of the end of the furlough scheme is that those people who have survived that process will be back at their desks in the next couple of weeks. Certainly starting to move back in. So there's people around, but it looks like, as I say, I'm sure the announcement, if it may have been on Friday last week, but it's very fresh in terms of the news. And I think there's a few that are looking at this that kind of move. Actually, what were we doing in the studio? Can we move it into the main house and spread everyone out and do a bit more? And I think the venues are getting more confident with how they can manage those audiences.
I'll get in touch with Andrew Tinley.
Andrew, I was trying to pull his name out of the back of my head, but it would be worth. I'm sure it'd be worth tipping them over, because it would be very unlike Derby to not want to offer accessibility. They're normally, right on top of it. So it'd be very, very, very odd for them to have not thought about it. They may just not have got around to that part of the process yet, because as I say, if it's anything like the way we're working at the arena, decisions tend to get made almost on a daily basis, and everything changes overnight.
If I emailed, like you said, with suggestions about keeping myself and their staff and customers safe, that would probably be more welcome than a flat email just saying, hello, I'm still here.
Absolutely.
So has anybody got a suitable risk assessment that I could use as a template? No.
I've probably got one that is somewhere nearby. It won't be very specifically around audio description, but there's a couple of bits that we've done through process that will probably only take a bit of a tweak to work for audio description, partly because we've risk assessed for our technicians to be back in our technical booths, and then that's not 100 miles away from what you would be doing.
Right.
So I'll send something your way.
If you could,
absolutely, no problem.
Ping me that ASAP, then I'll try and get to them by email before the blind audience are completely forgotten in the equation.
Yes, no, absolutely. There was some interesting. We'd had a. I don't know whether any other of you are attached into venues who were part of the Indigo survey that was running over the last few months. So there's been a survey that Indigo have looked after, which is gone out. It's gone out nationally, but it's been attached to venues. So the final report came with a national picture and also the specific data for the people who'd identified as having come from your venue, audiences wise. And that gave some really interesting stats, actually, that assuming from the arena's audience specifically, assuming that the necessary COVID regulations were put in, we'd actually got a higher desire to return from our visually impaired customers than we had from our main customer base. Now there's great news. There's likely to be some statistical jiggery pokery going on in there as well because of the size of the audience, but there was certainly a lot more confidence. And I suppose that comes down to the fact that our visually impaired audience already feel incredibly looked after by us, so they know that if we were bringing them in, we'd have the same level of care given this situation. And I'm sure that that's something that is heard out across the piece. And Nadine's just put in the chat, did we ever collectively come to an agreement on how we thought an AD performance might go ahead? I don't think we did. Nadine, I don't think we did. But I think certainly as we've done our processes for Project Restart, as we're rather awkwardly calling it. We've certainly walked through some of those considerations.
We've talked about it a lot,
Yeah.
both in other venues as well as on this type of Zoom. But I don't think we ever came to any conclusions as to what we thought was a good idea and how it should happen, and which might be useful if things are going to start up again.
No, I absolutely agree. I think one of the things that's been evident to us as we've gone through the process at the arena is that actually, in lots of ways, making your venue COVID secure for visually impaired customers is easier than making it secure for the general public, because you've actually already taken a bunch of those steps in the way you normally care for that audience. So we found, as we've done our processes, that's gone in. I suppose, and it wasn't our list, so we may as well scooch over to it now. I suppose the touch tour remains the biggest question mark, I think. I think there are plenty of COVID principles in place now for how we would handle the headsets and the cleaning of headsets and the ensuring the restriction of cross contamination from those. As I say, with handling people in and out of the building, that again, it feels like the principles are starting to fall into place. But the touch tour remains the biggest question. Tim, there was some thoughts around that Ros had sent to you. Is there?
Yeah, we a little bit about it, because she was saying that she'd been speaking to a lot of participants and a lot of users, and I've spoke to some of the community as well, and they were saying they'd be like, why couldn't they just wear gloves and certain things, could be cleansed and wiped afterwards. There was almost a bit of a confusion from the community why a smaller version or an adapted version sort of couldn't actually happen in the future. I think that maybe what we should do is that as venues start to open shows again, and venues that would normally offer an audio description, like everyone's talking about Jamie. I know there's an audio described performance of Jesus Christ Superstar on September the 19th that Tony is doing. So I was hoping he was going to be here to talk about how they're preparing that and what they're putting in place for that, because that'll be a good sort of test model in a way. And I haven't heard any mention yet of anyone even sort of thinking of a touch tour. I think if anything happens, it's possibly an audio description. I was speaking to Danny Crone, who is the access officer and front of house manager at the Old Vic, and they're still trying to decide if to put something on physically in their venue at Christmas. They're going to come to a decision in the next week or so. And we were talking about how a touch tour could happen and how they could put a touch tour on, and like if it would be a limited like sort of touch tour where they would see, because she said her problem was always going to be the management. It was always going to be what they would allow in the current situation, is that you've got all these people high up who have different opinions about how things should be done, and it's always very political. And she was basically saying, well, how are we going to get all them to agree that people can come in for a touch tour? And we were talking about if it could be done in a way like, I know that I've had touch tours in the past with Anne where we kind of sat in the auditorium and we haven't been allowed to go on stage, and we've had actors in the sort of company or the producers or the stage manager actually stand on stage and talk, you know, to the visually impaired audience. You know, perhaps something like that, you know, could be trialed, and then possibly 1 or 2 items could be sort of passed around, and that, as we previously said, we could wear gloves, and perhaps it just needs to be adapted that way. But what we agreed, that me and Danny agreed, is that almost a way suggestions and ideas and a way of doing it kind of need to be formulated, so when venues start scheduling audio descriptions, we can go to them and say, well, this is a plan of action for doing a touch tour, because if we don't offer that, they'll automatically think, oh, well, that's not going to be, you know, viable during this time, and they just won't schedule one. You know, so that's my sort of thoughts and feelings around that.
Go on, Anne.
I was just going to say, having just been booked for the Gruffalo in, and the Lowry have done what you were talking about earlier, moved Six and the Gruffalo from their smaller theatre into the bigger theatre in order to be able to spread the audience out. And when I was asked about the show, my contact said, I don't know what we'll do about the touch tour. Should we just cancel it? And I said, well, no, I think we can do something. We can adapt it. Whether we talk from the stage, so you're more or less giving the introduction, but with a bit more detail. And there are maybe understudy costumes or spare props that could be passed around, or the actors with Tall Stories, they're a very good company. They might just come and say, oh, hello, I'm Gruffalo, this is my voice, or whatever. So that, I think there are possibilities. It probably, they've said already that we wouldn't be allowed on stage, but hopefully with a bit of thinking time, they may be able to come up with maybe replicas of things or spare things, or even just talking to people and getting people to sit spaced out, obviously, but as close as they can to the stage to make the most of any site they have. So I think it was just interesting that the initial reaction was immediately, shall we just cancel it? And then when I made my suggestions, he said, well, I'll go back to the company and see what they think as well. So I think that is the thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that the touch tour has to be cancelled. Then be ways around it.
It's a good show. I took my grandson last year.
It's great, isn't it? Yeah, I've done.
And it was, can't remember this, but it was in quite a big London theatre, so it does adapt well to being in a bigger theatre. I can't remember which one it was in, the Apollo, I think.
It's a lovely show, and they're a lovely company. They normally all come out at the touch tour, and we get to meet the Gruffalo and everything. So we can do some
and everything.
It's
I'm thinking if with children, sorry, with children, I'm aware there are disposable gloves, including very thin polythene ones. I know it's not very eco-friendly, that adults can wear. I think children with their smaller hands would find that quite difficult. But if we were creative and approached it from the other end, I agree there would be some loss of textural feeling, but the props themselves could be bagged and sealed or cling filmed or whatever. So you wouldn't be able to feel the wooden texture or the canvas or whatever it was. But if it was a hard thing, like this is Thor's hammer, you would still be able to feel the weight of it, the size and shape of it. So if both sides were willing to accept some compromise, there would be some way of sanitizing it and sealing it off and making that covering disposable and safe. Sorry, Nadine, go ahead.
Yeah, it's okay. No, I was just saying I would have great reservations about using gloves. You spread more germs using gloves. If everybody's got gloves on, you're spreading germs everywhere. There's much better to I think that suggestion of finding a way. You can get very, very fine, you know, like we have freezer bags or whatever, that can be sealed so that you don't get it on the prop. You then have to think of how you're not going to pass it along, but you can.
As you sanitize, do you?
You can sanitize it. You can get sanitized wipes so that you can wipe it and then pass it on. But if you wear gloves to do that, and then you have the same gloves, you'd have to wear a different pair of gloves to pass every single item. Because if you passed one item with one set of gloves on, and somebody had put some germs onto that, then you will put those germs onto the next item. Sorry to be clinical. That's just
no, and it's worth. It's fine, Nadine. I think you're absolutely right. I think the challenge comes. The challenge comes in the fact that that side of stage is going to be run even more securely than I would suggest the auditorium side of the stage is run, because although we've been talking again today, we've been talking about, you know, it'd be interesting to see what happens to the first theatre that is responsible for an outbreak, and that is going to happen. I've got no doubt at all that will happen in the next 6 months, and how that's handled and dealt with. But if your audience, one specific audience who were there on that day, goes down with COVID, well, that's one thing to a theatre. But obviously, if you lose your cast, that's a much more significant risk, and we all know where we're at currently as an industry with insurance. So having had, you know, casual conversations with some production manager friends of mine, you know, they've been talking about how they, you know, the biosecurity of their company and their production. But actually, in some ways, that makes these things easier, because every prop will be sanitized before and after use in every show. And even I was talking to a stage manager friend last week who is now, in the same way that she transfers mic packs around, or used to transfer mic packs around, she's now got an extra box on her regime for, okay, that prop's come off, it's going back on in a bit, and in between time we've got to get it through the sheep dip, as she was calling it, to get it through so that it's some of those things that you've talked about there, Nadine, I think are already happening on a production side, and we know what it's like trying to get companies to think about touch tours and take touch tours seriously, and some companies are incredible at it, but for a lot of companies it's another complication that if they can get away without having to worry about, they will, and I think that bit is going to be amplified. So I think, again, is just our ability to go in and say, well, actually, here's the approved way that we think we know we can do it. Can you make that happen? As Anne's just said, you know, almost everybody in every walk of life will always listen to you, you know, much more readily if you go with a solution rather than a problem, as we all know. So in a similar way to us saying, you know, well, would it help if our audio describer bought their own headset with them, you know, or, you know, would it help if we provided a risk assessment for you? You know, similarly, if we can provide, this is how we think a touch tool should and could work, you're taking an hour of their day to work it out off them, and they can then start looking at the solutions rather than the problems. So yeah, I think it's.
Neil, are you going to take the temperature of your audience members as they come in?
We're undecided at the moment, just because we know we're not opening for an audience until February, so we don't want to invest now in a bunch of thermometers and whatever if guidance has changed. I mean, guidance might have changed by Friday, let alone February. So we're undecided at the moment. I suspect we probably will by the time we get there. But we, again, end up caught between the practicalities of the real world and being part of a university. And the university's made a decision that it isn't going to have temperature checks on campus. We were sort of hoping they would, because that would make the decision for us, and they'd pay for it. But they've decided not to. So we're gonna ride it out and see. But to kind of go back to what I was saying, the email I had from the Hope Mill today states in there that they will be doing temperature checks at the door for those performances in December. So I suspect more will than won't, and I'm certainly getting unsolicited emails every day trying to sell me various thermometers on stands coming out of the sky on a drone, you know, powered by itself. You know, people who want me to spend £8,000 on the latest, you know, thing. And I got an email for the Lloyd Webber Gateway, the thing he brought over from South Korea, this spray down thing that he'd put into the Palladium. I had my first advert for one of those. I think they wanted £24,000 for one of those. Wolverhampton, there's some things you can't, you know, cleanse against.
People, Neil.
Yes, all 14 of them. Yeah, if you could just put £100 in the slot as you go through, that'll help me pay for this thing that we've had to put in. Laura's just put.
It's crazy anyway, because some people have. I mean, I have my natural temperature is 35. So if I had a temperature of 37, which is supposedly the norm, it's the equivalent of someone who is the norm having a temperature of 39 when they'd whiz you off to A&E. So if and there are lots of people like me who are snakes in another life, you know. But if when I went to the hairdresser, she took my temperature and she said, "Oh my God, it's 34.6." I said, "Don't worry about it. I'm conscious." But if I was irresponsible and I wanted to see a show, I could come in, go through one of those, you take my temperature, say 37, perfectly normal, average. I could be as sick as a dog. So I think it's very, you know, and there are lots and lots and lots of people like that whose normal temperature is not what the textbook says it is. So it's only a guide and it's not going to catch much.
No, and I think that's...
You've got to pay 20, whatever it is, £1,000 for it. I'm not sure you get your money's worth.
And I think that's that's what every theatre is doing at the moment, you know, is looking at, well, where do we spend the money? And, you know, to be brutally honest, we're not trying to kill the infection. We're trying to give our audience confidence to come to our venue. Because, you know, if we were doing the most obvious thing to, you know, stop the spread of infection, we'll stay shut. That's because that's the most obvious thing to do and the most successful thing to do. So it is balancing those things between what's socially responsible, but also what is going to give our audience confidence. And again, to go back to that Indigo survey, the things that came out the top of that survey nationwide in terms of audience confidence was about queue management and socially distanced seating. Everything else really seemed to be considered fairly irrelevant. So I think people are aware, as we all are, that when you're sitting in a theatre, actually, unless you've got somebody behind who's decided to cough on your neck for the duration of Death of a Salesman, sorry, that's flashbacks. But unless you've got somebody like that around you, actually, you're all facing the same way. You tend to sort of, yes, you're all breathing the same air, but it's no worse than being on, as 1,000 people have said on social media, a bus, a plane, any number of those places. But actually, the stressor areas in a theatre are the foyers, the corridors, you know what it's like when you get, you know, funneled out of a fire exit in a West End theatre at the end of the show once they've got all your money and they can't make any more money out of you. You know, we'll bring you through the grand Victorian entrance as you come in, but we'll kick you out onto the back street when you're done. And you know how claustrophobic those areas can be. And those are the stress points. So for us, you know, we are already looking at a sort of airline style ticketing process, so that rows A through D will be in one zone and rows E through F will be in another zone, and we will load A through D from 7:15 till 7:20, and we'll ask those people not to turn up until 7, you know, and try and have a more staggered queuing system. We're already looking at gazebos to put out in the street so that people can queue out in the street in the rain. You know, those are the things that we're having to look at, because I think I've said it in this group before, but we've got 150 seats, but in my foyer there is a passing point which is just 1.2 meters across, and everybody coming in or out of the building has to go through that point, and it's 1.2 meters. So we know where we have those stresses, and I think those are dealing with interesting because it's coming today, and there's an article on what's on stage about it if you want to go and have a look afterwards. But the Hope Mill are putting full barriers in between seat sets in their auditorium, so they're going to have 3 seats and then a perspex barrier, and then 2 seats and a perspex barrier, and then 3 seats and a perspex barrier, and they're only selling to 50% even within that build. So they're taking that approach. Laura's put a few things in the box that are just, I think, where she's having iPhone trouble, so I'll relay them. In relation to touch tours, she said there's actors on stage or in a corner of the hall is the way that it's done at the Malmo Opera, and they only have an opportunity to touch possibly a few costumes. And again, I suppose on something like an opera show or the big West Ends, the likelihood is they've got duplicates of things as well, which is always the other option for touch tour. You know, you're not touching the actual one that's used in the show, you're touching the backup one or the one that's been retired because it's falling to bits. And then she's also just put in, just want to say how wonderful you are all talking about creative solutions. I hope Denmark will be able to have AD hosts like you in the near future. Oh, us too, Laura. Always very happy to travel to Denmark to assist anyway when we can. So yeah, that's good to hear. But yeah, I think it's really difficult because as a venue, we're sort of looking at things going, do you follow what others are doing? Do you do what you think's best for you? Do you do a bit of in between? So I'll shut up in a minute and let somebody else talk, but we had a seat map for teaching. So teaching is coming into the main auditorium. Film studies don't have a huge number of students, so 16 was plenty for them. And we had a model where we were going to do seat 1 on row A, originally we were going to do seat 1, seat 6 and seat 12 on row A, and then the same on row C and the same on row E, leave the rows in between empty. And then the feedback from the university was, well, yes, but then people will have to pass each other to go to the toilet or do whatever else. So we then adapted it to be seat 1 on row A, seat 5 on row B, and seat 12 on row C, and then back. So it's kind of a snake. And then the addition to that, because we have a morning class and an afternoon class, is that we'll reverse the snake in the afternoon. So it'll be seat 1, 5 and 12, and then in the afternoon it'll be seat 12, 5 and 1, and the snake will go the other way. So we've only got to clean the 5 chairs in between the morning and the afternoon. And interestingly, what Nadine said earlier on in the chat, I don't know how many of you saw it, you know, venues are likely to be running on significantly smaller front of house teams, and potentially front of house teams made up of fresh people or new people, new appointments. And obviously there are concerns there around training, you know, whether they will have the training for handling VI, you know, hearing impaired deaf patrons, but also the additional responsibilities they're going to have, and that becomes the other consideration for us. You know, it's not just okay, we need to do this, this and this, but who's going to do it, when, you know, and what's the impact. I had a very interesting meeting the other day at the university. The additional cleaning costs to the University of Wolverhampton between now and Christmas are £2 million. And that it's predominantly all staffing, it's all pay predominantly, because the way the university normally works is that an army of cleaners come in at 5 a.m, they work until 10 a.m, and then they mainly all go home, and a skeleton team stay on for the day to blitz, you know, spillages and other bits and pieces. But that army is basically going to have to stay on from 5 a.m. till 9 p.m. every day. And so yeah, so, there are 5 campuses. We're in 4 different places. You know, it's a big operation, but it's £2 million between now and Christmas. And you know, those expenses are going to go on all over the place. So and I know we've been saying this a lot, and I know not a lot of action has happened on these, and that's sitting partly with me, just because of everything else, as I'm telling you, everything else that's going on in the world. But actually, a sort of a one sheet of this is how we think audio description will work. This is how we think a touch tool will work. Seems like a good way forward, and getting those produced in short order feels like a real commitment that we can make. And I think we should make move on those, and I will bump it up my priority list to start getting those pulled together, because I think those are the things that are going to make the biggest difference to us as a group over the next 6 months. Because I don't think it's too pessimistic to say that actually even once the theatres reopen, AD is not necessarily going to be at the top of their priority lists, and we're going to have to do some fairly strong advocacy to make that the case.
Neil?
Joe, go on.
As came up in the last meeting, it's crazy to reinvent the wheel or to feel a burden, Matthew at Vocalise came up in conversation. I know he's been beavering away, and we've heard some of his progress and developments. And I would just say again, keep connected with the people who've had the conversations. I'm not sure what Michael Kenyon is up to. That work, those connections will have been made in the interim, I'm sure. So I would just,
Yeah, I had an interesting.
Get the lowdown, really.
Yeah, I had a quick chat via email with Matthew yesterday or the day before. I'm away at the weekend, so I can't make the launch of the report on Monday. But yes, we're having a chat, and then he's going to come and talk at the AGM. He's agreed to be on one of the panels at the AGM. So we'll hear from him then. And yes, you're right, he may well already have that in place. Julia?
I'm just saying, I think he's been on the steepest learning curve, and he's worked really hard. I've just had a great email from him this morning, actually, about the blindness at the Donmar. 15% take up of the AD and introduction and everything. So that was really good. But he's followed it all up, and he's kept in touch, and really, he's worked pretty hard, I think.
This is probably a question for Matthew. Julia, but just in case you mentioned it, 15% take up, do we know if that was predominantly VI customers, or
was was for the audio introduction, and then for listening at home, which was for the full, he said was around 200, he thought.
Wow.
So that would have been, there was 250 switched on, what it would be up to, so maybe about 200, but the Donmar was really thrilled. They had, I know Tim went, they didn't have very many live, I think only 4.
I did a lot of promotion on that as well, and we got that on RNI Connect Radio about 6 times. And
they weren't expecting huge numbers. I just think they felt that the first thing out was going to be quite a challenge for people.
Yeah, we were trying to get people to use it at home, and I think
that worked.
Yeah, and I've spoke to a lot of people, a lot of VI people who used it at home, about 20, and they all found it really.
Well, it was sent. The link to the audio introduction was sent out with every ticket to every audience member. So I think that was a really good thing. Yeah.
That's great. I think it's interesting, all the numbers that we hear, whenever we hear numbers, whether it's about NT live streams or, old Viking cameras or things that are starting to happen in the real world, are always really positive. And it's really good that Matthew and Vocalise are kind of keeping an eye on all those things and pulling them together, because that's the case, that we're going to have to make, and that we're going to have to support. And we know it's going to be a huge journey getting audiences back, period, let alone audiences with additional needs. Getting any audience back into the theatre is going to be a battle. So having those things in place to, I don't need any convincing, but there will be producers and artistic directors and who will need convincing out there. And so having all those things together, and I think the report that's due, that's launching, although I think we've seen most of it, haven't we, in one scale or another at some point, that's coming from Vocalise, is going to do part of that as well. Megan, I just wondered whether you wanted to give us an update on the other side of the Atlantic and how things are looking over there.
For us here in the Midwest, there is nothing happening. None of the theaters are open. There may be something happening. Well, I don't even think. I was going to say in New York, New Jersey, their numbers are a lot better than ours right now, but I don't think so. Even the virtual stuff we had is kind of going away. I think a lot of people assumed that by now they would have moved on. So a lot of the virtual stuff is slowing down, or they've just developed virtual things that look like this, that are basically Zoom meetings, that are plays, and there's not a lot to describe. So we've got a big fat nothing happening right now, unfortunately. So
where are you? Chicago way?
Close. I'm in St. Louis.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Very, very close. 5-6 hours from there. So
American close. Yeah.
Yeah, American close. Yeah. 5-6 hours from there. So in the Midwest, our numbers here are very high. America, they're too busy protesting wearing masks to be concerned about things like theater, I guess.
Yeah.
So nothing.
That's good. It's good to hear. I don't know whether you said before, I've got a lot of colleagues in Seattle and similar there. Yeah, it's scary looking that way at the moment.
Yeah, the wildfires are really the number one story this week. Because they're not just wildfires in a forest anymore, they're wildfires in towns and suburbia. And so we really don't know how to fight them because you're not in the forest. So we've got that. And then today, a hurricane is supposed to hit Louisiana today. So it's not looking hot this week.
Good job you've got a competent government who will be able to handle all of that without any issue.
I mean, can we blame it all on Trump? I mean, that would
most
be a
of
really
us
good thing. That would be a really good thing to do.
Yeah.
Hey, we're about 50 days away from an election, aren't we?
49.
49, there we go. Hope against hope, eh? Thanks for that, Megan. It's really useful just to hear about. Okay. So I think that covers most things that were on the list. I don't know whether anybody got anything else they wanted to. Go on, Mo. Oh, you off, Mo? Bye, Mo.
Hand up.
Anne, go for it. Yeah.
The
there you are.
survey that's been sent out as well with Vocalise. They were going to send a survey out to the theatres they work with, or on behalf of the theatres they work with, to blind and visually impaired people, asking them about coming back into the theatre. So I suggested it would be a good idea if it came from the Audio Description Association as well. So hopefully some of those results will feed. It sounds very much like the sort of thing that's already been happening, Neil, that you were talking about. But again, it just gives pointers to how people are going to feel about coming on touch tours and coming into the buildings and things. Yeah.
We've had this rather from the Royal Shakespeare Company this week about how they seem to be retreating. I think it's going to be very hard for Stratford as a town if they do less. But I know I saw RSC, the Scribers, are going to put a letter together, another letter, to, I think, because some of the staff are coming back off furlough, I think, to just stress what we can do. And if they're going to do more digital stuff, that we're able to describe it as well.
I think this is the other stressor that's kind of coming into the picture now, is that some venues are really starting to motor ahead with doing things, and as I said, I've had quite a sort of frank and open conversation with my team this morning, because they were starting to sort of say, well, when are we going to open? When are we going to do this? And unfortunately, the specific circumstances of every individual building, from the way their finances are organised, the way they're funded, the way their staff teams are constructed, their audience profile, their geographical location, every single one of those has an impact on how viable it is to reopen. And it is going to be really tough, I think, for those people who are not able to. As I say, we have no intention to open before February. We're very likely to be doing some things online, and we'll be streaming some things out of the building, but we're not going to have an audience back in, because it doesn't make any sense for us to invest any money that we know we're not going to recoup. But other venues like NIMAX have said, well, actually, we're putting stuff on so that we can keep staff employed. And those two completely different profiles, my staff are all paid for by the university are happy to back us for at least another 12 months. So we have a completely different reason and set. And I was talking to some actor friends as well, you know, one of them has got work and is actually having a real mental health struggle with the fact that they've booked a job because of sort of feeling, you know, survivor's guilt or whatever, that, you know, they're now have got work for the next few months and will be okay, when all of their other friends are still you know, trying to make ends meet and driving Ocado vans and doing whatever else they're doing to you know, make a living. So it's, the restart is, I think, going to be as challenging as the lockdown has been. And I suppose it's important, I think sessions like this, you know, are just really useful to just remind each other that we're not on our own, and there are other people out there, and there are people who can support and lend an ear and whatever else. So yeah, it's whatever we can do to ease the way on that. And I don't know, I feel like there may be a some last minute replacement for the furlough in some regard, because I think, having particularly given the rather scary unemployment numbers that hit this morning, I think there's I'm sure that something will come in place. Otherwise they're going to have you know, just as much problem on the other side of things. So yeah, it's just worth considering those things as well. My list is pretty much done, because Tony was also on my list, but Tony doesn't seem to have reappeared. So maybe we had him just for a slither at the beginning and he's had to head off. But was there anything anybody else wanted to grab the floor for?
Like, I was just going to add to what you were saying before. I think that a lot of venues are like looking at ways in which they can function in the current climate. Like, had an email today off the new Vic, which we went to with a different meeting, and they are reopening for the autumn, but have completely changed their program, and they're doing a sound installation, and then they're doing a very different sort of Christmas show. It's quite good, that venue, because it is in the round and it's got 4 separate entrances, which means you can sort of control that. You can space people out. And they're a charity as well, so they've got a lot of funding that has already been given, that's kind of helping them out a little bit. And I am hearing things about other venues where they look at their numbers, they look at their economics, how much money they're going to make from a show, how much they can afford to pay staff, how much they can afford to pay actors. And then they look at that and see, oh, well, is it financially viable for us to open? And some say it isn't, so they cancel their shows until further notice and say we're going to, and then others say, well, if we do it differently, where perhaps the shows are shorter and we can maybe have 2 shows a day, and then we can bring in twice the amount of people we'd normally bring in. It's a bit like with the Dom model in a way. I think one of the reasons why that was so effective is they had kind of 3 or 4 shows throughout the day. It was shorter and it was continuously bringing in people. Even though it was reduced numbers, it was still bringing in quite a few people throughout the day. And also with a sound installation, you weren't having to pay actors on the day as well. And I think a lot of venues are looking at that sort of model on how they can do. And I know that the new Vic will probably offer audio description because they have volunteers who do theirs and they don't actually pay them for it, which I don't particularly agree with. But I suppose in this sort of current climate, that's, you know, a way where they do remain a little bit more accessible. But it's interesting to hear what other people think about how I think creativity at the moment is playing a part in actually making sure that venues are open, because I think they're looking at ways in which that they can put smaller, more intimate events on.
I agree. Yeah, I think they are. And actually, one of the things that's probably worth saying is that, you know, we've certainly looked at it. We've looked at things that we can do, and the first bit from a producer's point of view is, okay, what's the least amount of money we can spend to put something on that is of the quality that we would expect from this venue, and actually, it may be a good opportunity to be approached by an audio describer, because when you're cutting everything to the bone, if somebody then comes in and offers you additional audience at a relatively affordable price, if you take the other way that things normally work at this time of year, which is you put every pound on the stage in the hope that you can get as many pounds back from your audience, and you overload your budgets at this time of year, and, you know, you go for spectacle and, you know, trying to outdo the theatre down the road. If you've actually taken a reverse view of that, you know, if every pound's on the stage and then somebody says, oh, and what about your audio describer? And then you're trying to find the money out of a huge budget that's already committed. Actually, if you've massively tried to save money, and then somebody comes along and says, well, have you considered audio description? We can open it up to this audience for you as well. The money may well be there in some venues. Certainly, I know my overriding budget, so the money that we would spend to run the theatre between now and Christmas, last year was around about 115,000 pounds. What it's actually going to cost me to run the theatre between now and Christmas, including doing a massive technical install that we're doing to ensure our future, is going to come in at about 60,000. So I've got this huge shortfall this half of the year. Now, obviously, I'm also having to offset the fact I won't be making any box office in that time. But if making a show accessible was then becomes financially viable, it becomes a much easier financial conversation. And I think, as Mo was saying, you know, about Derby, I'm sure she approaches them with her usual rates. I would guess the money's there, because they're not putting a huge show on the main stage. Now, yes, that money is likely being diverted into other places, but, you know, we're not offering a service that costs a month's salary of a member of staff. So that's always worth bearing in mind, I think, at this time, and making those approaches. Great. Well, I think we've given a good go at it. And as we're only 2 weeks and a bit away from the AGM, or is it today actually? Is it 2 weeks today? Fortnight today?
Yeah.
2 weeks today, the AGM. I'm sure I'll see most of you there. We've got a couple of panels that we're going to do on that day. One sort of talking about where we've come from, and then one talking about where we're going. So hopefully we've got some good content for you on that day as well. But it's I'll give you, as I said last time, as my manager keeps saying, I'll give you the gift of time of a whole 15 minutes. It's lovely to see you all. And keep well, and keep the communication going if there's work out there that people can help with. That seems the most important bit.
Brilliant, Neil. Thank
you.
Lovely.
Thank you so much, Neil.
Go and make the best of this weather while it's still here. Pleasure. See you all soon.
Bye.
See you all soon. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Keep